Invited to come and was very honoured to come to address the Human Rights Committee of Congress and the Senate, which I did in Brasilia. It was for that reason that I came this time. I have been before, and I hope I'll come again. What is called an international human rights lawyer. I was for 17 years a judge in England, and I was a United Nations judge. Firstly, I was president of the War Crimes Court in Sierra Leone, and then I was what they called a distinguished jurist, member of the UN's Internal Justice Council, which interviews and selects judges. So I'm an expert on judges, and I wrote the International Bar Association paper on the independence and impartiality of the judiciary. So I am involved in judging judges. I'm also involved in what is called international human rights law, in different ways. I acted for Human Rights Watch in the case against General Pinochet in the House of Lords in England. I was the inquisitor, the inquirer into terrible conspiracy to arm Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel to provide them with weapons from Israel. They bribed some corrupt politicians in Antigua to order the weapons from Israel, and Escobar picked them up from Antigua and used them to kill politicians in Colombia. So it was a big international investigation that I conducted, and I gave evidence to the US Senate about it. These are just a few examples of my work. Perhaps the most important case, most relevant case I have done was a case called the Hauschild case in the European Court of Human Rights. It was 20 years ago, where Denmark, oddly enough, had a similar system to Brazil, where the inquiring judge made all these decisions against a suspect and then turned round and tried him. And the European Court of Human Rights said, no, this can't be done, because justice must be seen to be done. The trial judge must be perceived as unbiased. And no one could think that a judge who had been involved in the prosecution process, supervising the prosecution, could then turn around and become a trial judge. So all the European countries, including Portugal, had to alter their inquisitorial system law to provide a new, fresh, independent judge to deal with contested trials. And of course, America and Britain have a jury system. America spends weeks getting an impartial jury. It's fundamental. And this is what I think needs to be the Brazil public have to understand, that even though you've had this system dating back 200 years, it comes from the Catholic Inquisition, where you have a Grand Inquisitor who does all the investigating and then sentences the poor old heretic to death. It's not a fair system. It's been examined by human rights courts who have said it is not fair. You cannot have Judge Moro sitting as the trial judge, because he has been ordering all the measures against Lula. He has been, in his case, he's released to the press the audio tapes of conversations between Lula and his family, even his lawyer. That's disgraceful. your own Inter-American Court in the Isha case said it was disgraceful. And Judge Morrow, he may be a very fine anti-corruption campaigner, but he's not a judge. He should never sit as a judge by international standards, even though in Brazil you have this antiquated, now this primitive, I have to say, primitive idea that a judge can be an investigating judge and a trial judge. It can't. Under international law, there must be a perception of bias. And when he goes and parades himself in public, giving encouragement to the demonization of Lula, going to the film about Lula the other night, and he is someone who loves to publicize himself, and by doing so he damages his any appearance of fairness. So no one in their right mind could think that he was a fair judge, that his decision was necessarily correct. So you have come to the appeal court, and what happens? The Chief Justice of the appeal court pronounces Morrow's decision impeccable before he even reads it. What sort of banana republic is this? You know, Brazil will become a joke if these judges are allowed to behave like this. That is my concern. We are developing an international human rights law, one of the fundamental principles ever since Eleanor Roosevelt handed it into the United Nations was that judges must be independent and impartial. And in this case, Lula's judges are not. Well, that's a big debate about the political appointments in America, the Supreme Court. It depends on the president. The Democrats were unlucky. The Republicans are lucky in terms of appointments. And so with Donald Trump's most important decision was to appoint a right-winger to the Supreme Court, which means that there are more or less 4 to the right, 4 to the centre, and anyone else goes, and it'll be a right-wing court. But that's an example of at least transparent case. I think Brazil is slightly more interesting because in Britain and America and Europe mainly, you are not appointed a judge until you are in your 50s and you have done prosecution and defense in many cases. But here you get appointed a judge after you sit an exam in your 20s, and you climb up the judicial ladder, and you live in this self-contained world where you're very well paid and you tend to protect your own. And I've been quite amazed that the Judges' Union at Juve has actually come out in support of Judge Morrow, their member, but has condemned Lula and has even criticized taking his case to the United Nations. What sort of cowardly, weak judges would object to having the case taken to the United Nations, which is Lula's right under the law of Brazil? What are they afraid of? That their own inadequacies will be exposed? But they don't need to be inadequate. What Lula's case is illustrating is the inadequacy of Brazilian law and perhaps the egomania of one particular prosecutor who should not be sitting as a judge. It should be helpful to the judicial system because it will emphasize, I think, the importance of independent and impartial judges, and let us hope that Lula, notwithstanding Judge Flores Thompson, does receive justice.